Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some yarn and gauging basics. I am personally not a gauger, but hopefully there's some information here that could help you whether or not you are a gauger. Here I have a copy of the standard yarn weight system. It's basically just a table that shows the different size of yarns for their thickness and the recommended hook sizes and gauges for those yarns. It goes anywhere from a size 1, which is your fine, like your baby weight yarn, your worsted weight medium yarn, and your super bulky yarns. If you need a better view of this, you can find it on the Lion brand website, or also I believe the Bernat website. And as you can see, they have a little disclaimer that says these are guidelines only and reflect the most commonly used gauges and hook sizes for these yarn categories. Basically, that's the manufacturer saying, you know, these are the guidelines, but they're not the law. You know, you're up to your own creative abilities there. Now here is a example of the, I would personally call this a little bit more finer crochet thread. It's not, you know, super fine, but I would personally call this pretty fine as far as for crochet work. And when actually on the ball it's labeled as a size 3, a light 3 weight, and the actual recommended hook size and also knitting needle size is a F or size 5 or a 3.75 millimeter hook. And as you can see, this is just a quick example of going with the guidelines. It's very, very thin, very small stitching, very tight. And then here's just another example of a similar type yarn, you know, fairly thin and very small stitching, tight stitching. Now here is an example of the baby sport yarn, which again I would say is fairly thin for my liking, but I had it available, made a project, and again it is listed as a light 3 weight, but on this one the recommendation is a G6 or 4 millimeter hook. And this again is an example of how you can go, basically you can go above or one below the recommended size, and this one was actually done with a size H or 5 millimeter, and as you can see it's a little more stretchy and a little more airy, if you will. Now next we are getting into your medium and worsted weights. This here is what usually comes in smaller balls, like the little 2 and 3 ounce balls, but it's the cotton thread, cotton yarn, and you can see it's listed as a size 4, and the recommendation on this one is a H or a 5 millimeter. And here we have probably the most common, which is your worsted weight yarns. But just to show you that, you know, even the manufacturers know that it's not a perfect standard. Here we have a size 4 weight, medium weight, and recommended size H8 or 5 millimeter hook for that, because it is just a hair finer than, say, your more common worsted weight. Again, a size 4 medium, but this one is recommended an I9 or 5.5 millimeter hook. But again, with the worsted weight, it's very, very common, very universal, very beginner friendly. So you can go anywhere I would say anywhere from a size G to even a size K, with very few problems there. Now next we have the Lion brand Homespun, which is a size 5 or bulky, and they recommend a size K, but a J will work just fine. With the project I used this for, I believe I actually used an L, because again I wanted the stretchiness. One thing I would say about this is I do not recommend it for beginners, because if you actually look at how it's made, there is a core strand and then the other lighter strands are spun around that, given its texture and homespun type appearance. But the problem is that if you do not actually tie this off, you can see it does have a tendency to fray rather easily and has a very low tensile strength. So I would definitely recommend to tie off the end and then start your work, a few inches past that. Now on that same note, we have here this Fun Fur or eyelash yarn. It's very deceptive in that you would think with it being, again, looking kind of a fine thread, you would think it would be fairly easy for a beginner, but it's not. I would not recommend it for beginners, and because as you can see, once you start working, it's very hard to see individual stitches, which, if you did make a mistake, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But again, if you're trying to learn and you can't see what you're doing, that makes it fairly difficult. The one thing I would say, even for more advanced, is to go ahead and pair that up with a regular worsted weight. That just makes it a little easier to, feel and, if in the right lighting, be able to actually see the stitches as you're working. Because again, this also has kind of the core strand with the feathery bits hanging off of there. And then just another example of the same type, not exactly the same, but basically the same type of yarn here is the baby buckle. Again, I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner because, again, it stretches weird and it has the same problems as the homespun and the Fun Fur. Now here we have some super bulky, which is actually the Lion brand Hometown USA, and it's considered a super bulky. And this little hat was actually done with one ball and I believe a size N hook, or it was a 9mm hook, just because I believe that was pretty close to what was recommended, and again, just for my personal preference there. Now when it comes to hook gauging, very simple when you're dealing with regular size hooks. It's pretty simple in that, here we have a I9 or 5.5mm hook, and if I were to actually square that up and measure that, you can see that it is, just over the 5mm mark. If you have, a slide rule like this, sewing ruler like that. Whereas here we have an N or a size 9mm, and if we do that same thing here, you can see that the diameter here is, pretty close to a full centimeter, which 10 millimeters is 1 centimeter. So that's basically where that's sitting there. Another thing about that is, as you can see, this one is an aluminum hook. It's a boy size N, 9 millimeter. And part of the reason why on the labels that they give you the options for, so many gauges and hook sizes and names is because I actually have these here, which are the Red Heart crystal lights. They're plastic, molded, but I'm gonna have to show you what the actual label is. The size 9 here, size 9 mil here, is actually the size M, and the size N is 10 millimeter. So again, just try to show you that a little better. We have the L as an 8 millimeter, the 9 millimeter is your M as in mother, and the N is actually a 10 millimeter. And this one also came with a P, or 11.5 millimeter, which is this one. And then the next one above that is actually the size Q, which this is, I believe, more like just to show you real quick, is it's like a 18 or 19, possibly a 20 millimeter hook there. And just to continue, here I have a quick example of, if this was a hook, it would be a size S, as in sister, and this is your super speedy, if it were a hook, the size 50 millimeter, but as it is in the knitting needle form, it's to use in your broomstick lace and items like that. Now on the other extreme end, when it comes to hook sizes, you have your steel hooks, and these are for your doily making and thread work. And this one is actually an aluminum hook. It is a size D, or 3.25 millimeter. And here, oops, not that one, but here we have a size 0 steel hook, which is also the 3.25 millimeter. Now, also have a size 1, which is a 275, and I believe this is the size 8 and the size 11. Now, when you get into your steel hooks, as I showed you before, with your regular hooks, it's the diameter, your actual diameter is the measurement, the gauge of your hook. With these, you have to start thinking, kind of in negative numbers, or like in wire gauging, where the larger, like here we have, the larger the gauge number is obviously a very small point, small hook there. The larger the gauge number, the smaller the actual item, and that's based on, I could fit 11 of these per the same unit as I could one of these, which is actually the size 0. So if you think of it that way, if you think, as the D or 0, 3.25 being 0, basically, then your steel hooks would be going opposite or negative in their gauging that way. So that's just about all I've got to say about the simple gauging and yarn basics. Thanks for watching.